She was just a woman in need of help, until the officer assigned to her case fell in love with her. The night was damp and the wind carried a kind of silence that always seems to come before something inevitable. The streets of the small town, nearly empty, held the same weight as someone hiding too many secrets. Water rushed through the gutters and pooled over the cobblestones, reflecting the old lampposts and the trembling yellow light, shivering as if it too felt the cold. Lillian walked alone, clutching her purse to her chest, her coat soaked and clinging to her skin. She wasn't running, but there was urgency in every step, a quiet, desperate urgency she tried to keep contained. Her face was wet, though it was unclear whether from rain or from what she tried to conceal. She was a woman used to enduring, not asking. 35 years old, a literature teacher, known for her soft voice and for listening more than she probably should. For years she had tried to live the right way, tidy home, presentable husband, carefully measured smiles. But the love she once believed would be a shelter had become a cage. That night, it wasn't fear of pain that made her leave. It was the fear of having to keep enduring it. She walked into the station without looking at anyone. The wet floor gave her away with each step. Her eyes, red and tired, searched for something she didn't yet know how to name. At the back of the room, surrounded by piles of reports and the bitter scent of cold coffee, sat the officer on duty. His name was Fabio Duarte. He was 42 and carried a kind of stillness that often looked like harshness, but was really the residue of someone who had learned to live among his own ruins. When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, he didn't see fear. He saw exhaustion. And somehow that struck deeper than any crime ever had. She stepped closer, slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out steady. She said only, "I don't know if I'm in the right place." He replied, his voice even, "If you came for help, you are." She took a breath, trying to hold back what was coming. "I don't want to file anything. I just need to understand what I'm supposed to do now." Fabio waited. He had learned that silence sometimes is what saves people. Then he asked, "Did he hurt you today?" She shook her head. "Not today." "Then why did you leave?" "Because I know it'll be tomorrow." Time froze between those two sentences. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. There were no tears, no theatrics, only clarity. He reached for a piece of paper, scribbled something, and handed it to her. "This is my direct number. If he shows up, call me." She held the paper with both hands, looked at him, trying to read the intention behind his voice. There was something in it, a quiet that didn't judge. Before she left, she asked, "Do you think people change?" Fabio took a moment. "Some do, but rarely because someone asked them to." She nodded slowly, slipped the paper into her purse, and turned to leave. The door closed behind her, and the sound echoed down the hallway. Fabio kept staring at the empty chair in front of his desk. She was just another woman asking for help, he tried to tell himself. But there had been something in her breath, something in her eyes that left no room for indifference. The rain still fell outside. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something inside him shift too. She, on the other side of the street, walked without knowing where to go. But somewhere between fear and exhaustion, a quiet belief began to grow in her. That maybe life had just decided to begin again, without warning. What she didn't know yet was that everything would begin at that very moment. The next morning, the sky was pale. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that metallic scent that lingers after a storm. Lillian awoke in the armchair, still wearing the same coat from the night before, her hands clasped in her lap. The clock on the wall read 7:20, and the ticking sound seemed almost painful. On the table, the paper with the officer's number lay open, stained by water. She stared at it like someone trying to read a map in a language they don't understand. She picked up the phone, began dialing the number, then stopped. Put the paper away again. Fear, even when it seems to leave, always leaves a trace. She stood and walked to the window. The street was empty, the gate half open. She remembered the night before, the moment when he, her husband, had raised his hand but stopped mid-motion. Perhaps for the first time, he had seen something in her eyes he'd never seen before. No pleading, no begging. The absence of fear is sometimes the clearest sign of danger. For years, she had tried to believe he would change. But love, when it becomes a constant wait for kindness, stops being love and becomes survival. She opened the door. The yard was still wet, the cold wind brushing against her face. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, the air filled her lungs completely. Meanwhile, across town, Fabio arrived at the station. Stacks of files on the desk, the air thick with dust and cold coffee. But something felt different that morning. Lillian's face was still with him, the look of someone who hasn't given up, but is one breath away from doing so. He tried to focus on the paperwork, but his mind kept circling back to the same moment. Her question, "Do you think people change?" And his answer, which now sounded more bitter than honest. He responded to calls, gave orders, tried to carry on with the day. But by noon, before heading to lunch, he picked up the phone and dialed the number he had given her. Let it ring a few times. Nothing. He hung up before the last tone. Maybe it was for the best, or maybe it was cowardice. That afternoon, Lillian left the house. No bags, just a change of clothes and a folder of documents. She went to the school. Her co-workers greeted her with the same neutral smiles as always, noticing nothing. Routine is the most effective disguise. She taught for 2 hours, spoke about a short story by Clarice Lispector, The Woman Who Tried to Find Herself. The words sounded like her own, though she didn't intend them to. As she read, her body felt light, like she was finally speaking something that had long needed to be said, even if only to herself. When class ended, she walked to the side street where cars were parked. The wind carried the scent of late afternoon. And then she saw him, leaning against the black car, her husband. He said nothing, just watched her, narrow eyes, short smile, that false calm that always came before the storm. She stopped, her whole body on alert. She knew what was coming and knew she couldn't go back. He stepped closer, 2 strides, spoke low but just loud enough for only her to hear. "So, this is how it is now. Running to another man." Her heart raced. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know. I know about the number he gave you. I know you went to ask for help." She stepped back. "I don't want to fight. Neither do I. I just want what's mine." His tone was far too calm, the calm of someone about to snap. When he reached out his arm, it wasn't to grab her, it was to intimidate. But that movement alone was enough. She resisted the touch, pushed him away, and walked off quickly without looking back. She boarded the first bus that came, no destination in mind. Her body trembled all over, but her mind was steady. She pulled out her phone, and before she could think, she dialed. "Officer," his voice came instantly. "Lillian. He was waiting for me at the school." "Where are you now?" "On the bus." "I don't know where I'm going." "Stay on the line, I'm coming for you." His tone didn't allow room for debate. She nodded, even though he couldn't see. She looked out the window. The sky was darkening again. The rain had returned, light, persistent. When he found her, the bus had already stopped at a deserted point near the old road. She was seated, her face against the glass, staring at nothing. Fabio opened the door and looked at her in silence, just gestured for her to come. She stepped down, her blouse soaked, hair plastered to her face. He took off his coat and placed it over her shoulders. "I told you to call me if he showed up. I didn't want to cause you trouble. I'm not the one in danger." His words were firm, but his eyes were pure care. They reached the station in minutes. He had her sit, offered water. But she couldn't drink. Her hands trembled too much. "I need a place to stay the night," she finally said. "I know a safe guest house." "You'll stay there until we sort this out," she nodded. "And after, we'll figure it out." In the car, silence. She stared out the window. He stared at the road. Between them, an understanding not yet spoken. When they arrived, he got out first, spoke to the owner, a discreet elderly woman with kind eyes. He said only that Lillian needed shelter and that it was a police matter. Lillian entered the room, small, simple, clean. Fabio stayed at the door. For a moment, neither knew what to say. She broke the silence. "Do you believe there's life after fear?" He took a while to answer. "There is, but it's not the same life." She nodded, and his gaze lingered just long enough for her to feel something unfamiliar, safety. He turned to leave, but before he did, said, "I'll come back tomorrow to check on you," and left. Lillian was alone. She lay on the bed, his coat still around her shoulders. The scent was faint, familiar, and for the first time in years she fell asleep without listening for approaching footsteps. Outside, Fabio sat in his car before starting the engine. He looked at the rearview mirror and saw the light in her window. Placed his hands on the steering wheel, breathed deeply. He knew he had crossed a line, but he also knew that sometimes ethics and the heart don't speak the same language. The radio murmured an old song, barely audible. He let it play, without noticing that he was smiling for the first time in a long time, and just like that it began, the start of everything that would change their lives. The morning was cold. A soft breeze slipped through the cracks in the guest house window, stirring the sheer curtain. Lillian woke before sunrise. For a few moments she didn't know where she was. She looked around, the simple room, clean sheets, a small suitcase in the corner. It took a while for her to realize the silence wasn't a threat. It was peace. Her body, however, still held the reflexes of fear. The mind takes longer than the space to understand it is safe. She stood, walked to the mirror, and looked at her own face. There were traces, small ones, but also a new kind of serenity barely visible. For the first time in years, she didn't need to choose her words to avoid conflict. She didn't have to measure her tone, her gaze, her gestures. It felt strange and liberating. Later, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart raced, an old reflex kicking in. But when the door opened, it was Fabio. He carried a folder under his arm and a cup of coffee in his hand. She straightened up, a little embarrassed by her reaction. "I didn't want to knock," he said. "Thought you might be asleep." "I haven't really slept in years," she replied without irony. He handed her the cup, brought coffee. She took it. Their fingers touched, briefly. A simple touch, but enough to stir a kind of tension neither acknowledged. "I came to check on you," he said. "I'm better." "And your husband?" "I don't know, but he'll come back. He always does." "This time he won't." Lillian looked at him, trying to tell if that certainty was professional or personal. His eyes left no doubt it was both. "I don't like promises," she said. "Then think of it as a decision." She nodded. There was something in his tone that calmed her, even when it sounded firm. In the days that followed, he began showing up every morning, sometimes with reports for her to sign, sometimes just to ask if she was okay. The conversations started short, but the silence between them flowed easily, needing no explanation. With time, they began talking about other things: the cold, books, the city, their childhoods. He listened with attention, and for the first time, she spoke without fear of being cut off. Lillian learned Fabio had been married. His wife had died 5 years ago in a car accident. She didn't ask much, but the way he spoke her name made it clear the pain was still there. One afternoon, she saw him leaning against his car, staring into the distance. His posture firm, arms crossed, gaze far away. She walked over without knowing why. "Do you think a lot about what you've lost?" she asked. "More than I should." "Me too. But some losses set us free." "They do, but only after they stop hurting." The conversation ended there, but the silence that followed held something of mutual understanding. One night, the rain came hard. The power went out. Darkness swept through the guest house, and fear returned in waves. She tried to stay calm, lit a candle. But the sound of rain on the roof was the same sound that so many times came before the shouting. Then, a knock at the door. Lillian froze. It took her a few seconds to recognize the voice. "It's me." She opened it. Fabio stood there, soaked, hair dripping, flashlight in hand. "The city's out of power. I came to check on you." "I'm okay, just startled." He stepped inside, scanned the room. "You don't have to be afraid." "I don't know how not to be." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Fabio looked at her, and his gaze lingered longer than it should. There was no pity, only recognition. "Fear doesn't go away," he said. "We just learn not to obey it." The candle cast a flickering glow over them. She looked at him like someone learning to recognize safety for the first time. He breathed deeply, trying not to cross a line he knew was there, but that was slowly fading. "Want some coffee?" she asked, breaking the silence. "I'd love some." While she prepared it, he stood by the window listening to the rain. The scent of fresh coffee filled the room. When she returned with the cups, their fingers brushed again, and this time, neither of them pulled away. His eyes moved from her hands to her face. "Lillian, I know we shouldn't." But what they shouldn't do hung unspoken between them. The distance was minimal, and when she drew a breath, he caught the soft scent of her skin, the warmth so near. The kiss came without warning, natural, inevitable. There was no rush, no force. It was slow, full of pauses, as if every second needed mutual confirmation. When their lips parted, she kept her eyes closed for a moment. "I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like to be touched gently," she said. "Now you remember." The night unfolded in silence. He stayed close, seated in the chair beside her bed. She slept, truly slept, for the first time in years. Fabio watched her, not with desire but with respect. Every quiet gesture of his was filled with tenderness. In the morning when she woke, he was still there. Sunlight poured through the window, turning the walls golden. Lillian looked at him and smiled, a small, tired but whole smile. "You slept here?" "I did." "You didn't have to." "I know." He stood, ran a hand through his hair, adjusted his coat. "I have a shift to cover, but I'll be back this afternoon." "You will?" "I will." She walked him to the door. Before he left, she said, "Officer?" He turned. "Thank you." He nodded. "I haven't done anything yet." But they both knew that wasn't true. From that day on, something shifted, unspoken. Their glances held a quiet intimacy that needed no explanation. Her fear had become his shelter, and without realizing it, what began as protection slowly began to turn into something neither of them had been ready to feel again. The days that followed brought a quiet unlike any before. The rain had eased, the sun returned slowly, shyly, and with it, the morning sounds, the distant chime of the church bell, birdsong, the low murmur of cars on the main road. At the guest house, Lillian returned to simple gestures. She tidied the room with care, as if trying to rebuild her own body through routine. She folded his coat, the same one she'd worn on the night of fear, and laid it gently over the chair. Sometimes, when her fingers brushed the fabric, she remembered the weight of his hands holding hers, firm, steady, but kind. That's what disarmed her the most, the gentleness. Fabio came back every morning, not missing a single day. He said it was to check on the investigation, but they both knew it was more than that. He arrived at the same time each day, with the same strong coffee and the same calm expression, the look of someone who sees but doesn't rush. The way he walked into the room without knocking already said it all. They had crossed from duty into something else. Lillian waited for him, though she pretended not to. She set the table with 2 cups, opened the window to let the air in. When he arrived, her eyes would light up, briefly, subtly, but just enough for him to notice. "Did you sleep well?" he always asked. "Better," she replied. "I still dream of the wrong things, but I wake before they catch me." He would smile softly, and the silence that followed was never empty. It was peaceful. One afternoon they went for a walk. It was a cloudy Sunday, the breeze cool. They strolled through the town square, where old trees cast long shadows on the ground. They walked slowly, side by side, without touching. People watched. The officer and the woman everyone knew, though no one dared to speak about it aloud. Lillian noticed the glances, but didn't shrink. After so long being looked at with pity, this new gaze, his gaze, Fabio's, was enough. It was the look of someone who truly sees, not someone who judges. They stopped at a used bookstall. She picked up an old copy of Dom Casmurro. He asked, "Why always this one?" "Because it's about doubt." "And doubt is what drives love. I thought it was trust. Trust is what comes when doubt becomes bearable." He said nothing. She looked up and found him looking at her in a way that made her hold her breath. It was the kind of look that doesn't need words, the kind that simply recognizes. Days turned into weeks. The fear she carried slowly began to dissolve. There were still moments, noises on the street, shadows in the mirror, memories rising like ghosts on rainy days. But now there was also a voice beside her, always present. Fabio, in turn, began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: lightness. He realized he spent his days waiting for the moment he'd see her again. The hours at the station stretched longer when he didn't know if she was okay, and at night, when he returned home, the silence felt heavier than before. One evening he arrived unannounced. He knocked and heard her steps inside. When she opened the door, she wore a simple dress, her hair down. The room smelled of cake and coffee. She seemed surprised, but not uneasy. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "Neither did I." He looked at the cake on the table. "Expecting someone?" "No. Sometimes I cook just to remind myself I can still care for something." Fabio stepped closer. The sweetness in the air mixed with the gentle scent of her skin. "Can I try some?" "You can." She cut a slice, handed it to him on a small plate. He tasted it, nodded. "It's good." "Just good?" "Good enough to make me want to come back tomorrow." She smiled, a real, quiet smile, one she'd almost forgotten how to wear. And once again the silence between them became full. Later, near the end of the night, they sat side by side, listening to the soft return of rain. Lillian gazed out the window. "You know what's hardest after everything?" she asked. "What?" "Accepting kindness. We get so used to fear that when someone's gentle it feels like a trap." Fabio said nothing. She turned to him. "But you're not a trap, are you?" "No," he answered. "But I'm not a saint either." She smiled, and his honesty felt more comforting than any promise. "Good." Time slowed. The rain became the background to what came next. His touch on her face was soft, like asking permission. And this kiss wasn't one of discovery, it was one of recognition. There was no rush, no guilt, only the moment, two bodies finally meeting after a long time living in silence. In the days that followed, there were no confessions, no declarations. They simply began to live as if they belonged to the same life. Shared breakfasts, conversations at dusk, long silences, calm, unburdened. Lillian slowly returned to teaching. Fabio discreetly stopped by the school now, and then under the pretense of delivering paperwork. She pretended not to notice. But her eyes always changed color when she saw him. Serenity returned. He waited for her after class, and they walked together to the guest house. It became a habit, natural, almost necessary. There was tenderness, but also desire. The kind that grows slowly, respectfully, but when it comes, becomes undeniable. One evening, as she arranged papers on the table, she asked, "Do you think people change because of love?" "I think love only arrives when we've already started to change." "So you think I've changed?" "I think you've finally come back to who you always were." She looked at him for a while, then asked, "And you?" "Me? What changed in you?" "I want to stay again." The silence that followed was a shared confession. Neither smiled, but peace filled the room. In the days that followed, their relationship grew quietly. They needed no promises, no explanations. Each gesture was enough. The way she left the window open when she knew he'd come. The way he always brought extra coffee, just to have a reason to stay longer. And without realizing it, what once was survival had become something greater, a mature love, born of pain, but purified by truth. The end of winter brought a different kind of light. The city, used to grey skies, began to open itself to the sun. Trees blossomed again, and with them, the rumors. In small towns, silence is never just silence. It's the pause between one story and the next. Lillian's name, once forgotten, began to circulate again. She's staying at the guest house. They say the officer visits her every day. She should be ashamed. The whispers spread from mouth to mouth, laced with glances that pretended to be neutral. Fabio didn't care. He knew what they said, and he knew the kind of people who live on gossip would never understand what he felt. But work began to feel like unsteady ground. His commander called him in privately. "Fabio, you know how much I respect you." "I do." "Then understand this isn't personal." "What isn't personal?" "The woman from the case. You got involved." "And that's a problem?" "For some, yes. For me, no." The commander looked at him, tired. "The town is talking. The press wants details. Some say you protected her too much. I protected someone who needed it. Even if it costs your position? Even if it costs what's left of me?" He left the room without waiting for a reply. The words echoed but didn't strike as they should have. Fabio knew that true love always comes at a cost, and he was already willing to pay it. Lillian, on the other hand, was starting to feel the weight of exposure. The stares at the market, the whispers at school, the anonymous notes left at the guest house door. Everything she had fought for, her courage to leave, her right to exist, was now being threatened by malice in new forms. She tried to stay calm, but old fear returned wearing new faces. No longer the fear of the man who hurt her, but the fear of judgment. That invisible kind of violence that slowly corrodes everyday life. One afternoon, she went to the station. When Fabio saw her walk in, his body immediately tensed. "You shouldn't have come here. I needed to see you. The whole town already has." She stepped closer, eyes steady. "I know what they're saying, but I'm not disappearing again because of it." He admired her in silence. There was a strength in her that surprised him, not the strength of someone who wins, but of someone who refuses to hide. "I just don't want you to get hurt. I've already been hurt. Now all that's left is to live." The words hung between them like an unspoken promise, and in that moment he realized this decision was no longer just his to make. That night, Fabio's phone rang. It was the officer on duty. The voice on the other end was urgent. "Sir, the teacher's ex-husband, he's been seen in town." His breath quickened. "Where?" "Near the bus station. Get the location. I'm on my way." He threw on his coat and left without hesitation. The rain had returned, light but steady. As he drove, Lillian's face at the station replayed in his mind. That steady gaze, that calm exterior, and the realization that this was no longer about protection. It was about fate. Hours later, he pulled up in front of the guest house. He got out quickly, his heart pounding. Donna Elsa appeared at the door, alarmed. "He was here," she said. "Asked for her, said he just wanted to talk." Fabio entered without a word. The hallway smelled like fear. He knocked on the door. No answer. He opened it. The room was empty. The bed unmade. The suitcase open. For a second, panic. Then, a sound, rushed footsteps in the side corridor. He stepped out. Lillian was approaching, breathless, hair soaked. When she saw him, she stopped. "He was here," she said. "He said he'll come back." Fabio stepped closer, his face tense but his gaze steady. "I won't let him touch you." She looked at him for a moment. "I don't want you to risk yourself for me." "It's too late for that." The rain grew heavier. There was something in Fabio's eyes, a mix of fear and resolve. the look of a man who, after a long time, has finally found something he's not willing to lose. The days that followed hung heavy, like mist. The police kept watch, but the man seemed to have vanished. Still, fear didn't leave them. Lillian slept poorly. Fabio, when he could, slept there, in the armchair beside her bed. There were no words those nights, just the shared breath of two bodies that, without knowing it, were keeping each other alive. One early morning, the sound of breaking glass, a jolt, a scream, the gate being forced open. Fabio jumped up. The man stood in the courtyard, gun in hand, face deranged. "She's mine," he screamed. "You think you can take what belongs to me?" The shot came before the thought, a dry crack, then complete silence. The man fell, struggling to breathe. Fabio stood frozen, body tight, heart racing. Lillian stared at him, trembling, wide-eyed. He approached slowly, held her face in both hands. "It's over." She shook her head. "Nothing ends like this." Sirens grew louder in the distance. Red and blue lights cut through the dark. They took his body away. Fabio wrote the report, each word heavy as lead. At the end he wrote, "The woman survived, the aggressor was detained, the case is closed." But he knew it wasn't, because what remained now wasn't fear, it was what comes after fear. In the days that followed, Lillian said little. She walked slowly, stared at the rain through the window. Fabio gave her space, but never strayed far. He brought coffee each morning and waited. One morning she finally spoke. "When I saw him fall, I felt nothing. No pity, no relief, just emptiness. That's normal." "No, none of this is normal." "Then call it human." She looked at him, and her eyes were no longer those of someone who needed protection. They were the eyes of someone slowly beginning to live again. Fabio stepped closer. "You're free now, Lillian." "Free from what?" "From him. And from myself." Silence answered for him. Then she added, "Sometimes freedom is scarier than prison." He nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. That night, for the first time, she slept without him in the armchair. But before he left, he said, "If you need me, call." "I know." And for the first time, she truly did. She knew she wouldn't need to. The city returned to its usual rhythm. Cars passed by, windows opened, neighbors talked about the weather and the price of fruit. Everything seemed the same, but it wasn't. Some stories leave invisible marks in the air, like dust that refuses to settle. At the guest house, Lillian's room remained tidy, but the space felt different. Her body felt different too. There were still dark circles under her eyes, still tension in her shoulders, but her gaze had changed. There was no fear anymore, only exhaustion, the deep kind from someone who carried the weight of the world and finally laid it down. In the first days after the gunshot, silence took over. Not the tense kind from before, but a heavy, reflective silence. As if everything needed to be understood before it could be forgotten, she began walking the city in the early mornings, feeling the cold pavement under her feet, the wind against her face. She walked without direction, as if testing her own freedom. People looked at her, some with respect, others with curiosity disguised as pity. But she didn't flinch. She owed no one anything anymore. Fabio had returned to work. The routine greeted him with the same stack of reports and the same scent of stale coffee, but nothing was the same. There was a different stillness in him, the kind that comes after the storm, not from peace, but from exhaustion. The investigation was closed. No formal charges filed against him. The town slowly lost interest. But when his eyes met Lillian's, there was still a weight there. Not guilt, but responsibility. He knew he couldn't save anyone. But he also knew that that night he had done what needed to be done. Sometimes the line between what's right and what's necessary is what separates the living from the regretful. One afternoon, he stopped by the guest house. Lillian sat on the porch reading. Sunlight filtered through the trees, resting gently on her face, as if it too recognized the woman she was becoming, lighter, freer. "What are you reading?" he asked, stopping in front of her. "The Passion, according to G.H. Intense, but honest. You like what hurts. I like what makes me think." He sat beside her. The wind moved the leaves, their rustle filling the space between their words. "How have you been sleeping?" he asked. "Better. I still wake sometimes expecting to hear the key in the lock, but then I remember the noise is gone. The body takes time to understand." "It does, but it understands." She closed the book and turned to him. "And you?" "Me." "Are you sleeping?" "Not much." "Why not?" "Because sometimes you get so used to danger that when it ends, your body misses it." She smiled, not out of amusement, but in empathy. "Fear is addictive." "It is. And love?" "Love breaks the addiction, but leaves a scar." They fell silent again. A quiet, easy silence. He looked out to the horizon. She looked at him. And in the still air, without warning, they both realized they were okay. Not fully healed, but alive. And for now, that was enough. The days continued, simple, slow. She returned to teaching part-time. The children liked her. They said she spoke like someone telling a secret. Maybe that was true. Each of her words a way of saying that, despite everything, there's still beauty. Fabio visited her less at the guest house, more often outside of it. They met for lunch, for walks in the square, for moments of shared quiet. Their love was never urgent. It was the kind of love that learned to wait, content just to exist, even if no one else noticed. One afternoon it rained. She was in the classroom sorting papers when she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. She turned and saw him in the doorway, his coat soaked, that same calm look in his eyes. "It's raining too hard for you to walk. I came to get you." "I thought you were on duty." "I was, but life is more stubborn than the police." She laughed, a short, tired, but genuine laugh. He stepped forward, held out his hand. "Shall we?" "Let's." In the car, the sound of rain on the windows was the same as months ago, but now it wasn't a threat. It was memory. She looked at him, his serious profile, hands steady on the wheel. She thought of everything. The night she fled, the station, the fear, the shot, and then she realized what remained now wasn't trauma. It was time. Time to be. Time to stay. Time to learn what it means to live beyond fear. Later that night back home, she wrote in her notebook. The words came slowly, as if still testing the sound of their own freedom. "The truth is, no one goes back to who they were. But sometimes, someone appears at the exact moment, before what's left collapses completely on and stays. Not out of pity, not to play the hero, but because they see what can still bloom." She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and walked to the window. The rain was easing. Across the street, she saw his car parked. It wasn't surveillance, it was presence, the kind of care that doesn't suffocate. It simply stays. And for the first time, Lillian understood what peace really means. It wasn't forgetting. It was no longer being afraid to remember. Winter gave way to a hesitant spring. The city, once cloaked in grey, began to bloom in colour. But Fabio and Lillian still moved at their own pace, as if their time followed a different rhythm than the rest of the world. He moved between work and his quiet visits. She lived between her classroom and the silence of the afternoons, and between them, something grew effortlessly, a kind of closeness only known by mature love, the kind that doesn't ask for promises, only presence. One Sunday afternoon, she waited with freshly brewed coffee. The table was set, a simple cloth, the smell of bread still warm from the oven. He arrived unannounced, as usual, stepped in quietly, taking in the scene. "You're always waiting for me," he said, draping his coat over the chair. "I'm not waiting, I just leave things ready in case you come." which is the same as waiting, she smiled. You like being right, and you like pretending not to notice. They sat. For a while only the sound of cups and spoons. The air was warm, sunlight filtering through the leaves in the yard. It felt like any other afternoon, but there was a gentle tension in the air, a quiet expectancy both of them knew, yet neither dared to name. After coffee, they sat on the porch. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was intimate. The kind of silence that only exists between those who truly understand each other. She gazed at the garden. Sometimes I feel like I'm still relearning how to exist. Aren't we all? It's not easy. It's not supposed to be. She turned to him. You always speak like someone who's figured everything out. I haven't figured anything out, I just stopped running. The breeze carried the scent of damp earth. She breathed it in deeply. Fabio, I thought I'd never be able to love again. And now? Now I realize I still don't know what love is. I just know I don't want to feel afraid anymore. He moved a little closer. There was barely any distance between them, yet an invisible line remained. That kind of respect that only comes with real care. Fear doesn't disappear, he said. We just learn to walk with it beside us without letting it lead the way. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were steady but soft. His, filled with a rare kind of gentleness. Time seemed to pause, suspended between two breaths. Lillian leaned in slightly. The kiss came unannounced, without hesitation. A kiss that didn't ask. It simply arrived. Slow, whole, calm. As if time had been waiting for this moment since the very beginning. When they pulled apart, her eyes remained closed, as if afraid reality might undo what had just happened. You're going to regret this, she whispered. I've spent too long regretting the things I never did. He touched her face with the care of someone holding something fragile. The same hand that once held a weapon now trembled under the weight of tenderness. The days that followed were quiet but meaningful. She started spending more time at his place. There were no grand gestures, just the right ones. Coffee made before the other woke up, a jacket draped over a chair, a shirt folded carefully, not to impose, but to belong. Their routine was light but full of depth. She laughed at little things. He watched her laugh like someone witnessing something rare. That was how they loved, quietly, without spectacle. At night, they sat on the porch. They spoke of the past but didn't live in it. Sometimes she asked about his late wife. He answered with serenity, as someone who had made peace with what was. And gradually, the ghosts turned into simple memories. But the world, even when it doesn't interfere, watches. The whispers returned. Not malicious, just curious. The cop and the teacher. This time, neither of them hid. He took her to the market on a sunny Sunday. They walked side by side, like any couple. People greeted them. Some looked away. Others smiled with quiet respect. Their courage was in their normalcy, in the simple act of existing without explanation. Later, at home, she watched him reading the newspaper. The light from the afternoon rested gently on his face, which seemed lighter somehow. She walked over slowly and asked, "Have you ever thought about quitting?" "Quitting what?" "This job. I've thought about it." "So why don't you?" "Because I still believe in fixing what can be saved." She nodded quietly. After a while she said, "Then teach me how to stay." "Stay?" "Yes, stay without fearing loss. Stay without the urge to run." He looked up and found her gaze. That one sentence held everything. The past, the pain, the hope. Fabio stood, walked over to her and said, "I'm still learning too, but we can learn together." The kiss that followed wasn't urgent. It was a vow, a silent pact between two survivors. That night, it rained again. The sound of raindrops on the roof matched the rhythm of their breath. Lillian, lying beside him, stared at the ceiling. "I'm afraid of being happy," she confessed. "So am I." "So what do we do?" "We feel it anyway, even with fear." She turned to face him. Is that how love begins? No. That's how it survives. She smiled, closed her eyes, and rested her face against his chest. Outside, the rain mixed with the steady beat of his heart. And in that moment she understood. When love arrives at the right time, it doesn't come to rescue, it comes to stay. The months passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm. The seasons shifted, but what remained between them was constancy. Love was no longer a promise or an escape. It had become part of the everyday, as natural as shared morning coffee in silence, or the coat she hung on the same chair every night. The home they built grew slowly, like everything meant to last. Fabio had bought a small house perched on a cobbled hillside. From the porch, they could see the city below. The market, the children, the bells. The wind blew stronger up there, and sometimes it carried the distant sound of rain. She'd say it was the past leaving. He'd answer it was the present learning to stay. Lillian turned part of the house into a classroom. Books stacked on shelves, plants in the corners, and the sound of young voices filling the space that had once been only silence. The afternoons were light, and the nights long enough to rest. Fabio still left early for the precinct, returning at the same hour, with the same calm steps, the same measured gestures, but his gaze had changed, clearer now, more at peace. He was still the respected officer, still bore the weight of the badge, but there was something deeply human about him now, something that had emerged from beneath the armor. His co-workers noticed, though none said it aloud. He smiled more, listened better, judged less. Maybe that's what love does when it matures. It doesn't change you, it simply reveals what fear had buried. Sometimes, on Sundays, they sat in the yard in silence. He'd read the paper while she watered the plants, and in every gesture there was an intimacy that needed no explanation. Their love didn't come with grand declarations, just everyday acts of devotion. He'd fasten her necklace before she left the house. She'd make sure the coffee was ready if he was working late. Little ways of staying. One afternoon, he watched her through the window. She was arranging books, humming softly. When she saw him, she smiled without a word. He thought, without needing to say it, that this was the kind of peace life rarely gives twice. As time passed, the town embraced them, not as a story or a rumor, but as a quiet part of the place. There go the cop and the teacher, they'd say. And no one talked about what came before. The scandal became memory, and the memory became an old tale, the kind shared over coffee, with the tone of someone speaking of a book long finished. But for them, nothing was ordinary. Each morning still held weight. Each touch still carried meaning. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Lillian called him to the porch. The sky was golden, the air light. She held an envelope in her hands. "What's that?" he asked. "A proposal." "Proposal? The university in the capital wants me to teach literature. Will you accept?" "I don't know." He looked at her, trying to mask his feelings. "It's what you always wanted. It's what I thought I wanted. And now? Now I just don't want to lose what I've found here." The silence that followed was full of understanding. Fabio stepped closer, took the envelope, and placed it on the table. "Then stay. And if I regret it, we'll regret it together." She nodded. And that was how they chose not to change anything, because sometimes happiness isn't in the new, but in choosing what's worth staying for. One night, the rain returned, as it always does in small towns. The sound of raindrops on the roof was the same that had once accompanied fear. Now, it brought calm. Lillian lay reading. Fabio beside her turned slightly her way. The lamp cast soft shadows across the walls. She lowered her book and said, "Strange how the sound is the same, but the meaning changes." "It's not the sound that changes," he said. "It's the one listening." She closed the book and looked at him. "Do you think we deserved this?" "I think we learned how to deserve it." The wind blew hard, swaying the curtains. She smiled. "So this is it?" "What is?" "The ending." He paused before answering. The ending only comes when we stop wanting. And do you still want this? Every single day. She leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. His body relaxed, and for a long moment no words were needed, only the sound of rain, the warmth of their hands, and time gently passing by. Months later, on a spring morning, she found an old notebook in the drawer, the same one she had written in long ago when fear was her only companion. She turned the pages, rereading what she'd written during those long nights. Then she picked up a pen and added a final line, simple, conclusive. Life didn't give back what I lost. It gave me something else, someone who stayed when everything else had gone. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sun bathed the yard, and there was Fabio tending the plants, his back to her, the same man, the same silence, the same gestures, but everything in her was new. Her voice in voiceover would be the only sound breaking the final quiet. She walked into that precinct asking for help, and walked out with an entire life ahead of her, because sometimes love doesn't come to rescue. It comes to remind you how much life is still left to live. She came in broken, asking for help, and left whole, not because someone saved her, but because for the first time someone stayed. And now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? From which corner of the world did you come to understand what it means to begin again, without rushing, without fear, and to stay even when everything told you to run? Tell me, where did this story find you?